You ever get that sense that life is just quietly laughing at you behind your back? Like, not even full belly laughing, but that kind of smug snickering your coworker makes when you spill coffee on your shirt right before a meeting, and they say, "Tough morning," knowing full well it's the third one in a row. That's kind of where I found myself on a Tuesday morning in late September, in the middle of Indiana, surrounded by drywall dust and half-finished trim work in what was supposed to be my own living room renovation. Brenda had wanted wainscoting. She read somewhere that it added charm and vertical definition. I had no idea what that meant, but I agreed because we hadn't really been agreeing on much lately, and I figured charm was cheaper than therapy. Brenda, my wife of 5 years. Blonde, sharp-tongued, fiercely organized. The kind of woman who made grocery lists for road trips and scheduled our dentist appointments 2 years in advance. She was the reason the Christmas lights came down by January 3rd and why we owned 3 different vacuum attachments for upholstery I didn't know needed vacuuming. I loved her. Still do, in a way that's complicated now. At the time, I figured we were just in a rut. You know, that middle-of-the-marriage slump where the only thing you share regularly is a Netflix account and the occasional comment about whose turn it is to take the recycling out. But still, comfortable. Safe. Which, as I would come to learn, is apparently a terrifying concept for some people. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some sort of saint. I snored. I forgot to replace the toilet paper more times than I'll admit. I once spent an entire Sunday fixing a door that didn't need fixing just to avoid going to her cousin's baby shower. But cheating? That wasn't even on the whiteboard. I'm not the suspicious type. I mean, I didn't even change the passwords on my streaming accounts when Brenda's ex, Marcus, got out of prison. Yeah, you heard that right. Marcus. The human equivalent of a car alarm that won't shut off. He was the man before me. The starter husband, as Brenda once sarcastically referred to him. A walking red flag who had, in her words, taught her what not to want. Their marriage ended with a restraining order and a very dramatic keying of his own truck, which Marcus somehow blamed on her anyway. She hadn't mentioned his name in years, except in that way people talk about food poisoning. Memorable, unpleasant, and unlikely to repeat. So you can imagine my surprise when I found out she'd been meeting him again. Not through some cliché discovery like a lipstick-stained collar or her whispering into her phone in the pantry. No, nothing that theatrical. This came courtesy of a church raffle. I kid you not. I don't even go to church. But Brenda had dragged me to St. Stephen's Fall Social, which is less social and more bake sale meets bingo night hosted by judgmental retirees. I was standing next to the punch bowl, non-alcoholic, of course, when Pastor Lenny pulled my name for the grand prize, a couple's pottery class downtown. Brenda clapped and laughed like it was the best thing that had ever happened to us, and I died a little inside at the thought of spinning mud on a wheel while someone named Skylar told me to center my spirit. The following Saturday was class day, except Brenda said she couldn't go. Karen needs help with college applications, she'd said. She's feeling overwhelmed. Reasonable enough. Karen, her daughter from Marcus, was 18 and had perfected the art of being overwhelmed. So I went by myself, like a fool, and spent 2 hours trying not to ruin a perfectly round bowl while surrounded by smiling couples who all seemed to have matching aprons and inside jokes. When I left, covered in clay and shame, I took the long way home. That's when I saw them. I was stopped at a red light, just minding my own business, when I noticed a woman getting out of a car 2 lanes over. Familiar blonde hair. Brown leather coat I recognized because I'd been the one fool enough to buy it for her after she said she was trying to find her autumn identity. She stepped onto the curb, laughing at something the driver had said. And then I saw him. The driver. Sunglasses at dusk, of course. Marcus. The traffic light turned green. My foot didn't move. I watched her lean into the car window, still laughing. She touched his arm. Just a tap, but when you don't give someone you claim makes your skin crawl. Then she waved and walked into a diner I hadn't been to since I got food poisoning there in 2014. Maybe that should have been the real red flag. I didn't confront her that night. Nope. I went home, showered off the clay, made dinner, and pretended like I hadn't just witnessed my wife casually interact with a man she used to refer to as a human dumpster fire. Karen's application went well? I asked over reheated lasagna. Oh, yeah. We got a lot done, she said, stabbing at a limp green bean. I nodded. You should have seen the bowl I made. Looks like something a raccoon gave birth in. She laughed. Genuine, even. Well, I can't wait to see it. Neither could Marcus, apparently. Still, I waited. Waited because sometimes, when you're in love, or something like it, You want to be wrong more than you want to be right. But things started clicking into place after that. Gaps in her schedule that didn't quite add up. An email I wasn't supposed to see, left open in her inbox under the cheerful subject line, long time, no fight, smiley face. And the kicker? A forwarded RSVP confirmation to the Oak Room, that overpriced tasting menu restaurant we'd gone to on our anniversary 2 years ago. Reservation for 2. Under his name. So yeah, turns out Brenda wasn't helping Karen with college. Unless Marcus was now teaching high school seniors how to plagiarize essays over creme brulee. You'd think I'd explode. That I'd shout or demand an explanation. But I didn't. I made a different kind of plan. One that didn't involve revenge, just clarity. I called up Brenda's sister, who'd always had a thing for drama, and invited her to dinner the following weekend. I told her to bring their parents. Told them it would be a surprise. Told them Brenda and I had something big to announce. Brenda, bless her heart, assumed I meant we were renewing our vows. She even bought a new dress. Brenda was humming. That was the first warning sign. No one hums like that on a Sunday morning unless they've either found religion, won a raffle, or are about to commit emotional tax fraud. And since she hadn't stepped foot in church since our wedding, and that was mostly to appease her aunt who thinks Netflix is the work of Satan, I was pretty sure something was brewing. She glided around the kitchen with her usual air of self-importance, moving spoons and pots like a conductor in some kind of symphony for people who have never actually cooked. She wasn't wearing anything new. No mysterious accessories. Just regular Sunday Brenda, which is to say, mildly annoyed with everything but pretending otherwise. I was sitting at the kitchen table under the same flickering overhead light that had been threatening to die since Memorial Day, half reading the sports section, half watching her move around like she was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. The night before had been our big dinner, the one she thought was her second chance to Pinterest our marriage back into shape. Her sister and parents had come, all dressed up like this was a family reunion and not what I was internally referring to as the Brenda reveal. I'd told them we had an announcement, and I guess Brenda assumed that meant something sappy. Maybe she expected a slideshow, a ring, a speech about how life was short and love was forever. Instead, she got something a little different. But before we get to that, let's rewind a couple days. Because there was a step in the middle of all this that I didn't tell her about. One I'm particularly proud of. I found Marcus. Not in the creepy way. I didn't stake out anywhere or wear sunglasses indoors. I just remembered he used to be a member at a local gym that still printed paper newsletters for some reason. It wasn't hard to track down. Turns out people who think they're God's gift to middle-aged women don't exactly keep a low profile. He still used the same gym, same routine, same swagger that screamed, I peaked in '07. Now, contrary to what every online article about taking back your power might say, I didn't go there to punch him, confront him, or ask him to be a man. Please. I went there to offer him a deal. He was in the locker room, shirtless, flexing at himself in a mirror that had probably been cleaned with spit and determination. I waited until the mirror conversation seemed to wrap up and said, You Marcus? He turned, a little puffed up, probably expecting a fight. What he got instead was me, holding out a manila envelope. What's this? He asked. Proof you're predictable, I said. Also an invitation. He frowned. To what? A dinner. With Brenda. And her family. Don't worry, you won't need to bring a dish. Just bring your complete lack of shame. To his credit, he didn't say no immediately. In fact, he looked oddly pleased, like he'd been waiting for his moment to burst back into polite society with all the grace of a wrecking ball. He took the envelope, looked at the address I'd written on a post-it, and nodded once. You want me to crash her dinner? No. I want you to show up. There's a difference. The man grinned like a substitute teacher who just caught a student texting under the desk. You got issues, man. Probably, I said, turning on my heel. But at least I'm not dating my own disaster resume. Fast forward to Saturday night. Everyone was seated. Brenda had curled her hair, which only happened when she was trying to win someone over or punish me for forgetting her half-birthday. Her sister wore a blazer that said, I work in HR and I have questions. Her parents looked exactly how I expected, mildly confused and already halfway done with their second round of wine. I waited until dessert to drop the curtain. Brenda reached for the pie, and I gently placed my fork down like someone about to give a toast. She glanced over, sensing the shift. I smiled. Before we dive into another slice of Brenda's family tradition, which, for the record, is store-bought, I thought now would be a good time for our announcement. She straightened up like she was waiting for a proposal. Again. I stood. Everyone. I'd like you to meet someone who's been very close to Brenda lately. Closer than even her beloved yoga mat. Right on cue, Marcus stepped into the dining room from the hallway, wearing a smug button-down that was probably tighter than it had any right to be. Brenda froze. Her mother gasped. Her sister made a sound like a coffee machine choking on old grounds. Marcus raised a hand, smiling like a car salesman in a TV had filmed at 2 a.m. Hey everyone. I brought wine. To her credit, Brenda didn't pass out. She just sat there blinking, like someone who just realized the GPS had been wrong for the last 50 miles. Her father looked from Marcus to me, and then back again. Is this a joke? He asked. Oh, not at all, I said. Turns out Brenda and Marcus here have been reconnecting. Thought it'd be good for the whole family to meet the man who's been getting all the emotional, if not nutritional, value out of Brenda lately. Brenda finally spoke. Jonathan, what the hell is going on? I gestured to Marcus. Why don't you ask your lunch date? He seems very eager to talk. Marcus, now enjoying this far too much, pulled out a chair and sat down like he belonged there. Look, I know this might be awkward. No, I said, holding up a hand. Awkward would be finding his socks in our laundry. This is just efficient. Brenda stood up. Jonathan, this is insane. You ambushed me. No, Brenda. I planned something. Something real. Which is more than I can say for your little midlife reunion tour. There were no tears. No shouting. Just silence, and that buzzing feeling you get when everyone at the table realizes they're part of a story someone's going to tell at a future Thanksgiving where Brenda is conspicuously absent. Marcus, having misread the tone entirely, reached for a bread roll. This garlic. Brenda walked out. Not stormed. Not flounced. Just walked, like someone who realizes they left their phone in the car and knows it's going to be a long, silent drive. Her sister followed. Her dad muttered something about needing to check on the thermostat. Marcus finished the bread roll and left, offering a salute I did not return. That left me and the pie. It wasn't even good pie. Now, back in the kitchen, Brenda was humming. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just had her emotional resume stapled to the family corkboard. I kept waiting for her to bring it up. To apologize. To explain. To even make a joke about it. But no. She just poured her coffee, added 2 spoons of sugar, always 2, and asked if I wanted to go to Lowe's later. That's when I knew. This wasn't just denial. This was talent. Olympic-level compartmentalizing. So I smiled, nodded, and said, sure, let's go to Lowe's. She didn't know it yet, but I had already packed a bag in the garage. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to leave quietly. Cleanly. But not yet. I wanted to see what she'd do next. I was curious. It's strange what curiosity survives, isn't it? Tomorrow, I'd call a lawyer. But today? Today, I'd let her hum. Brenda decided we should repaint the laundry room. That's how it started, 3 days after the dinner, which, if we're keeping score, currently held the title of most uncomfortable night of my adult life. Narrowly beating out that time, I accidentally attended a candle-making class that turned out to be a breakup support group for recently divorced men. Long story, but let's just say I left with a lemon sage candle and a subscription to a newsletter called Healing Through Beeswax. Anyway, back to the laundry room. Apparently, our very functional, perfectly fine beige walls were no longer inviting, and Brenda said we needed a color that reflected optimism. Which is a weird thing to demand from a space where we mostly just argue about whether something is machine washable or a gift from your mother, so don't you dare ruin it. So off we went, to stand in front of one of those paint sample walls that looks like a poorly shuffled deck of sadness. Brenda zeroed in on a color called Sunlight Whisper. I pointed out that it looked identical to the one next to it, Creamy Light, and the one beside that, Soft Enlightenment. She told me they were completely different. I told her they were a conspiracy. The man at the counter suggested we get a few sample cans and test patches at home. Brenda nodded politely. I told him we were just trying to figure out which version of beige would help us forget that she had emotionally reenacted the Parent Trap with her ex-husband. He laughed, like he wasn't sure if I was joking. Brenda gave me that look she uses when she's debating whether or not she can make it through the day without fake smiling her way into a migraine. When we got home, Brenda disappeared into the garage to get the drop cloths. I stayed in the laundry room, staring at the wall, wondering how we ended up in a situation where the aftermath of an affair involved choosing between eggshell and satin finish. Somewhere in the process of betrayal and half-hearted reconciliation theater, we had landed squarely in Home Depot therapy mode. Brenda came back in, carrying the supplies like this was just another weekend chore. No mention of Marcus. No mention of the dinner. No, hey, sorry I treated our marriage like a timeshare. Just a reminder that we still had to pick up new light switch covers because the old ones are too plastic looking. Whatever that meant. We painted in silence for a while. Every now and then she made these little comments like, "This actually goes on darker than I expected," or "Maybe we should have primed it first." I nodded, said nothing, and focused on the wall. She wasn't trying to talk about what happened. She was trying to edit the footage in her head, cut out the parts that made her look bad, and repackage it as some kind of new beginning. After an hour of that nonsense, I went to wash up. As I stepped into the bathroom, something caught my eye in the hallway, her planner, open on the side table. Brenda is one of those people who still uses a paper planner, with color-coded tabs, highlighters, and a level of organization that would make a military general weep. Now, let me be clear. I wasn't looking for anything. I really wasn't. But the open page had something written in red marker, which was rare for Brenda. Red usually meant emergency or Karen needs money for something ridiculous again. This, however, said, meeting, Wednesday, 3 p.m., Z Supply Room. That wouldn't be strange if we had a Z Supply Room in our house. But we didn't. And unless Brenda had suddenly decided to open a secret Amazon warehouse in our basement, I had questions. So I asked, "What's the supply room?" Brenda, without even looking up from the laundry basket she was folding like it owed her money, replied, "It's a place at work. We use letters to label the rooms now. Easier than names." Z feels pretty far down the alphabet, I said. She shrugged. "It's just a storage room. Mostly office supplies and promotional junk." "Right," I nodded. "A hotbed for 3 p.m. meetings." She didn't even flinch. "It's quieter than the main conference rooms." Now, I've never worked in an office. I've always had a healthy fear of cubicles and whatever dark magic makes people believe in team-building exercises. But I've seen enough to know that nobody voluntarily meets in a storage closet unless they're either planning a heist or doing something they don't want HR to know about. So I did the reasonable thing. I waited until Wednesday. Brenda said she was working late, which was convenient. Said she had to prep for some product launch that apparently required deep thought and a complete lack of husbandly presence. I said sure, kissed her on the forehead, and wished her luck. Then I drove to her workplace, parked across the street, and sat in my truck reading a pamphlet on ductless heating systems someone had shoved in my mailbox last week. If you've never stalked your own marriage while surrounded by diagrams of wall-mounted units, let me tell you, it really puts your life choices in perspective. At 2:58 p.m., Brenda walked into the building. At 3:04 p.m., Marcus followed her in. That was when it hit me. Not just the betrayal that had already hit, but the comedy of it. These two were meeting in a supply closet like teenagers in a made-for-TV movie. She'd gone from, "I've moved on from him," to penciling in midweek tryst between lunch and her 4 p.m. status call. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. It was already clear. The dinner hadn't ended anything. It had just made them more careful. I stayed there for another half hour. Not because I was hoping to catch them in the act. I wasn't trying to win a game of emotional clue, but because I needed time to let the final piece settle in. This wasn't temporary. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of confusion. Brenda didn't cheat and regret it. She cheated and scheduled it. When I got home that night, she was already in the kitchen, acting like she hadn't just spent her afternoon rehearsing lies in a broom closet. "How was your meeting?" I asked. She smiled, poured a glass of water. "Productive." I nodded. "And the supplies? Fully stocked?" She froze for just a second, blinked, then forced the smile wider. "Always good to check inventory." It was so well rehearsed, I almost applauded. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't confront her anymore. What was the point? I already had the truth. I had the planner, the people, the timestamps. Brenda didn't need exposure. She needed consequences. So I stopped talking. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. I answered questions. I kept up the rhythm. But I stopped filling in the spaces. No more small talk. No more volunteering information. I became a mirror. She looked at me, and all she saw was herself. It drove her nuts. 3 days into that, she asked if something was wrong. I said, "Just tired." She didn't believe me, but what could she say? If she pushed too hard, she risked the very thing she was trying to pretend didn't exist. What Brenda didn't know was that I'd already started the paperwork. There was no yelling, no name calling, just forms, dates, and signatures. Brenda had already made her choice. I was just making mine official. I didn't need revenge. I needed space. And I was getting very good at planning things quietly. On the morning I dropped off the divorce papers, Brenda was still using my Netflix profile. I noticed it while I was brushing my teeth. Continue watching Love Like You Mean It, Season 3, Episode 6. Now, I have no idea what Love Like You Mean It is, but I'm confident I never meant to watch it, and I definitely didn't make it through 5 episodes by accident. That was Brenda. She never made her own profile. Just kept piggybacking off mine. Claimed it was too much work to switch users. Apparently, committing adultery requires less effort than clicking a different icon. So I did what any passive-aggressively enlightened man would do. I renamed my profile Jonathan, single and paying for this. Small steps. Quiet victories. The courthouse was empty in that weird way that makes you feel like you've shown up to a dentist appointment a day early. There was one guy arguing with a vending machine and a woman yelling into a Bluetooth headset about a stolen blender. I slid the envelope across the counter to a clerk who looked like he gave up on the concept of joy sometime around 2011. He stamped it like it personally offended him and handed me a carbon copy. That it? I asked. He didn't look up. That's it. Well, that was anticlimactic. No bell ringing. No applause. Just bureaucracy with the emotional range of a toaster. Back home, I put the carbon copy in the drawer where we used to keep warranties and user manuals for appliances Brenda insisted on keeping in case someone wants to make fresh yogurt someday. It was sitting right on top of the booklet for a $70 egg cooker we used once to create 5 perfectly shaped rubber marbles. I closed the drawer and stared at it for a second. It was official now. Brenda just didn't know it yet. Now, you might be wondering why I hadn't told her. You might even be picturing one of those big dramatic confrontations where I hand her the papers over dinner while she's asking me to pass the salt. But that's not my style. Brenda had already demonstrated a knack for rewriting history in real time. She could probably explain away a thunderstorm by saying the clouds were just emotionally processing. I wasn't interested in giving her a new scene to act out. I was interested in reality. The first change I made was subtle. I moved out of the bedroom, not into the guest room. No, that would have suggested a fight. I moved into the garage. To be clear, our garage wasn't some wood-paneled man cave with neon signs and a kegerator. It was a functioning, barely insulated, questionably wired garage. But it had what I needed: space, a door that closed, and the absence of a woman pretending everything was fine while secretly cataloging every lie she'd told in the last 6 months. Brenda didn't ask why. She just stepped over the extension cord, glanced at the folding chair I was using as a nightstand, and said, "Is this about snoring again?" I said, "Yeah." I figured it was time to take personal responsibility. She nodded like that made sense. Because of course it did. The man sleeping next to a bag of potting soil and a portable fan wasn't reacting to betrayal. He was just finally owning his nasal situation. The second change I made was to our calendar. We had a wall calendar in the kitchen, one of those laminated ones with dry erase markers and space for family goals. Brenda wrote things like try a new recipe and be more present. I started filling in the blank spaces with things like avoid eye contact, remember which lies we're telling today, and don't trust people who color code infidelity. She erased my notes. Every time. Didn't say a word. Just quietly removed them like they were grocery list errors instead of emotional graffiti. The third change was Karen, Brenda's daughter. 18, full-time expert in ignoring me since day one. But suddenly, she was home more often. She usually avoided eye contact like it was a contagious illness, but now she'd linger in the kitchen, make overly loud phone calls, and pretend not to be watching me from the corner of her eye. Eventually, she just asked, "So, is something wrong with Mom?" I shrugged. "Is this a trick question?" She sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "She's been acting weird. Weird like lying about where she's going, or weird like repainting the laundry room to cover up the sound of her conscience?" Karen blinked. "So, both." I didn't answer, but I could tell something had shifted. Karen wasn't full, just disinterested. But now, the story had started to write itself, and even she couldn't ignore the plot holes. The following week, Brenda came home with new throw pillows. I wish I was joking. She walked in, dropped a bag on the couch, and said, "I figured the living room needed a little refresh." I stared at the pillows. They were navy blue. Our couch was green. It looked like a furniture store misunderstanding. Brenda smiled. "You hate them." "No," I said. "They're exactly what I'd expect from someone trying to replace emotional accountability with fabric texture." She froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just admiring your commitment to home decor." She didn't respond. Just stood there, holding the receipt like it might defend her in court. That night, I heard her on the phone in the laundry room. The door was mostly closed, but her voice carried. Not the words, just the tone. That forced casualness people use when they're trying to sound relaxed but keep checking their watch. I didn't need to hear the name. I already knew who it was. The next morning, she tried to be extra cheerful. Offered to make me coffee. Asked how I slept in the garage. Said it like she was being cute. Like this was all part of some quirky phase, like those couples who try separate vacations to rediscover appreciation. I said, "Don't worry about the coffee. I'm good with tap water and quiet judgment." She tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means I'm adjusting." "Adjusting to what?" "Your choices." She blinked, clearly annoyed that I wasn't playing along with her sitcom reboot. Then she left for work without another word. That was when I knew it was time to move to phase 2. The house was in both our names, but I had options. One of them involved my cousin Terry, who ran a small property management company and owed me a favor. Another involved the fact that I knew exactly how much Brenda hated dealing with paperwork. I started making calls. Quiet ones. During her late-night meetings and weekend yoga intensives. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning a clean exit. No yelling. No pleading. Just space. When I told Terry I needed out, he said, "You want her gone?" "No," I said. "I want to go quietly enough that she has to sit in the silence and wonder why." He whistled. "Cold." "No," I said. "Efficient." By the end of the week, I had a place lined up. Nothing fancy. Just clean, quiet, and on the opposite side of town from her office. I didn't pack much. Just what I needed. Left the rest for her to sort through. I figured she liked organizing things. Let her organize this. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Not a dramatic one. Just a simple list. "You'll find the paperwork in the drawer under the blender. Netflix profile renamed. Feel free to make your own. The pillows still don't match." When she came home, I wasn't there. And I didn't plan to be. Brenda didn't call the first day I disappeared. She texted, though. 3 times. The first was just a question mark, like she'd misplaced me next to her keys. The second asked if I had taken the garage door remote. The third said, "If this is about the pillows, we can return them." Touching, really. I didn't answer any of them. I figured if she wanted to talk, she could open the drawer labeled blender and have a heart-to-heart with the divorce packet. Besides, I was finally somewhere I didn't have to pretend my marriage was going through a midlife rebranding. The new place was a 1-bedroom unit above an old chiropractic office. My upstairs neighbor was a ceiling fan with a loose screw. It hummed judgment at me every night, but at least it didn't ask where I'd been or if I'd seen Marcus lately. I expected Brenda to show up eventually. Maybe pull into the parking lot in a dramatic U-turn, march up the stairs, and demand to know what all this meant. Brenda liked meanings. She liked assigning weight to things. Like that time, I moved a lamp 2 feet to the left, and she said it felt like I was distancing myself emotionally. That kind of thing. But she didn't show. Not the first day. Not the second. And by the third, I realized she was probably still workshopping the script. On Friday, I got a knock at the door. I opened it expecting a clipboard. Maybe a neighbor asking me not to run the washing machine after 9 p.m. But no. It was Karen. Yes, that Karen. Brenda's daughter. The same one who used to speak to me only when the Wi-Fi wasn't working or when she needed a signature for a field trip I wasn't allowed to ask questions about. Now she was standing there, wearing an expression halfway between irritation and concern, like someone who just found out her favorite influencer had been lying about using drugstore mascara. "Nice place," she said, stepping inside uninvited. "Smells like drywall and sadness." I closed the door behind her. "Did you come to insult the interior or just scout out future escape plans?" She shrugged and sat down in the only chair that didn't wobble. "Mom's losing her mind. Finally catching up, is she?" "She's cleaning." I blinked. "She's always cleaning." "No," Karen said. "Like, actually cleaning." She took apart the microwave. "With tools." That was new. "She thinks you've gone on some kind of enlightenment journey," she continued. "Like you joined one of those retreats where you yell at pine trees and drink water from rocks." "Well, she's not far off," I said. "I did yell at the coffee maker this morning, and this place has exactly 1 cup, which I wash by hand like a pioneer." Karen tilted her head. "Why didn't you just tell her?" "I did. In several ways. She just decided none of them fit the version of the story she wanted." She nodded. "Yeah, that sounds like her." There was a pause. A rare one. Karen didn't usually pause. She was a fast-talking, eye-rolling, headphone-wearing storm of teenage apathy. But today, something in her had settled. Like she finally saw the joke wasn't on me. I think she thought you wouldn't actually leave, she said. She also thought temporary separation was a real calendar event, I replied. And that office closets were legitimate meeting rooms. Karen smirked. You're not wrong. She stood up, looked around the place once more. You gonna be okay? I've got a chair and a cup. That's 2 out of 3 basic needs. She didn't say goodbye, just nodded and left. Later that night, the text started changing tone. Brenda had evolved from confusion to subtle guilt. Not real guilt. Brenda didn't do real guilt, but she tried. One said, I've been thinking about our laundry room. We should have picked sage green. Another just said, Karen misses you. I didn't reply. I was busy alphabetizing the contents of the drawer in the kitchenette. I found 2 spoons, a takeout menu from a sushi place 3 miles away, and a packet of soy sauce that had fused with a paper napkin. That weekend, I got a call from Dave. Dave is what happens when your high school friend peaks emotionally at 23 but still thinks he's your life coach. He's the kind of guy who uses phrases like, realign your energy and take back the narrative, even though he sells replacement garage door parts and once got locked inside a golf cart showroom overnight. Dude, he said, what are you doing? I'm sitting in a chair watching a ceiling fan consider its options. I mean with Brenda. You ghosted your own house. I left. With paperwork. It's called an exit strategy. You sure this isn't just a phase? Maybe she just needed attention. She had Marcus for that. Dave made a noise like someone trying to dislodge a piece of meat from their throat. Wait, she's back with him? Was. Maybe still is. Honestly, I don't keep a roster. He paused. So what now? Now? I learned how to live in a space without throw pillows that critique my masculinity. Dave was quiet. Then, you need a coffee table. What I need is for people to stop pretending Brenda didn't make this choice. He didn't argue. Just muttered something about finding me one on Facebook Marketplace and hung up. By Sunday, Brenda sent an email. That was new. She hated email. Said it felt impersonal. But this one was titled, Let's Talk. I opened it. Scanned the first line. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Always a great start. Right up there with, we need to talk. And can I be honest? It was about 7 paragraphs long. Somewhere between a business proposal and a monologue from a community theater play about second chances. She wrote about time, miscommunication, nostalgia, her growth, my withdrawal, and how Karen deserved stability. No mention of Marcus. Not a word. Just this floating suggestion that we could maybe, possibly, talk in person, like we hadn't already played that scene 10 times in silence. I didn't reply. Instead, I scheduled the final signature meeting with the notary, updated my mailing address, and bought a desk lamp. The lamp had 3 settings. None of them were called forgive and forget. On Wednesday, I got another knock. This time, it was Brenda. She didn't look dramatic. No tears. No pleading. Just tired. Not even the kind of tired you get from painting laundry rooms. The kind that comes from watching the story you wrote in your head fall apart on paper. I figured you'd be here, she said. I held the door but didn't move to let her in. I read your note, she continued. It wasn't subtle. Neither were you, I said. She looked away. So that's it. That's what? We don't even talk? I crossed my arms. You already did all the talking. I just matched the volume. She stood there for a second, like she wanted to say more but realized there was nothing left that hadn't already been said and undone 10 times over. Can I ask why you didn't say anything sooner? She said finally. I did. You just preferred a version of me that didn't notice. She nodded slowly. Then, in a voice that tried to sound casual but failed, I'm not seeing him anymore. That's between you and your planner, I said. I'm not in the schedule. She gave me one last look, stepped back, and said, okay. That was it. She left, and I went back inside, sat in my one chair, under my confused ceiling fan, and finally, opened the Netflix app. I made a new profile. Named it just Jonathan. Because I finally was. 2 weeks after Brenda stood outside my door pretending to be surprised that consequences exist, I finally deleted her contact from my phone. Not blocked, deleted. Blocking implies the possibility of drama. Deleting just means you're officially bored. That tiny digital tombstone of a relationship, erased with a thumb swipe between a dentist reminder and a guy I met once at a plumbing seminar who still sends me group texts about poker nights I've never attended. I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Bitterness takes energy, and I'd spent the last 2 weeks using all mine assembling furniture from a Scandinavian company that gives you instructions drawn by a bald cartoon who looks like he's mocking your literacy. After fighting a desk drawer for 40 minutes, I came to a conclusion. Heartbreak is cheaper than therapy, but it's not refundable. Brenda didn't reach out again. I assume she realized that playing the "but we had good times" card only works when there's not a notarized document with your signature on it sitting in a manila folder in the county records office. Karen sent one final text that just said, "Well, at least the laundry room looks good." I replied with a thumbs up and haven't heard from her since. That felt like the healthiest goodbye we were ever going to get. My new life, if you want to call it that, started to develop something resembling rhythm. Not excitement, let's not get crazy, but rhythm. I had a chair, a desk, a lamp that didn't buzz like it was being interrogated, and a sense of peace that came from knowing no one was pretending around me anymore. I got up, I went to work, I came home, and nothing exploded. It was glorious. Dave tried to get me to join a divorce support group called Untangled. He said they met at a community center on Tuesdays and did something called narrative disassembly. I told him that sounded like an improv troupe and declined politely. I've seen enough crying circles on TV to know they end with someone hugging too hard and the coffee being decaf. Not for me. Instead, I started keeping a journal. Not a dramatic one. Just a running list of things I wouldn't tolerate again. It started practical. No sharing streaming profiles. No explaining basic boundaries. No pretending beige is a personality. But then it got more specific. Entry number 12. No one who organizes their life with color-coded tabs should be trusted with emotional nuance. Entry number 15. If her ex's name comes up more than 3 times in casual conversation, she's either not over it or writing a memoir. Entry number 19. If you find yourself painting a room to avoid a conversation, move. It wasn't all about Brenda, though. I wasn't trying to write a burn book. I was just trying to take inventory. You can spend years walking through a house you built and never notice the cracks until the door stops closing right. Then suddenly you're sitting on the floor with a flashlight thinking, how long has this been like this? Turns out, a while. Somewhere in all that reflection, I decided to go back and get the rest of my stuff. Not much left, some tools, a box of old photo albums, and the blender she never used unless she was on a 3-day health kick that ended with ordering delivery and blaming low blood sugar. I didn't warn her. I just showed up during the window when I knew she'd be at work and used the spare key that she apparently forgot I still had. If that sounds passive-aggressive, it wasn't. It was just quiet logistics. The house looked smaller. That surprised me. Not in some emotional "I've outgrown this place" way. I mean, it physically looked smaller. Maybe it was the new furniture. Maybe it was the lack of my junk. But it felt like someone had downsized a memory and tried to rent it out. I found my stuff exactly where I left it. She hadn't thrown anything out. She hadn't touched it at all. That was more unnerving than rage or drama. Just apathy. Brenda had moved on in the way you unplug a lamp you don't use anymore. No ceremony, just practicality. I took the box, the tools, and left the blender. I didn't want it. I never did. I only bought it because she said we needed one, even though I had never once woken up craving a liquefied vegetable. I left a sticky note on the counter that said, "You win. Keep the blender." It wasn't poetic, but it felt fair. On the way out, I noticed a new calendar on the fridge. Same dry erase style. Same empty family goals section. In the corner of the month was a note. Brenda's retreat. 10 a.m. I didn't even want to know what that meant. Spa weekend? Self-discovery seminar? A silent weekend somewhere you can't bring your phone? All fine. As long as it didn't involve me, Marcus, or the Z-Supply closet, she could retreat all she wanted. Back home, I unpacked the albums. I thought about throwing them away, but that felt like pretending none of it happened. And the thing is, it did. I was there. I remember the time we got rained on at the fair and she used her jacket to cover the funnel cake. I remember building that ugly patio bench she claimed was rustic. I remember laughing at nothing for 10 minutes during a road trip because the GPS pronounced Kokomo like it was choking. It wasn't all lies. Just enough of it was. I put the albums in the closet. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I slept without waking up once. No dreams. No imaginary arguments. Just sleep. When I woke up, I stood in the doorway of the new place and realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to walk in and explain themselves anymore. People ask what it feels like to move on. I don't know if I did. I just stopped rehearsing comebacks to a conversation I didn't want to have. Maybe that's close enough. I started making new lists. Not about Brenda. Just ideas. Things I hadn't done in years because they didn't fit into the grid of our shared life. Take a class. Fix the rust on the truck. Replace the blinds that have been crooked since last spring. Nothing revolutionary. But they were mine. I didn't miss Brenda. I missed the version of myself I used to be with her, hopeful, cooperative, convinced that communication and compromise were enough. But I also remembered that guys spent a lot of time justifying behavior that only made sense on paper. In real life, people don't cheat because of laundry rooms or mismatched schedules. They cheat because they can, because they think they won't get caught, or worse, because they think they deserve to be happy no matter who they walk over to get there. I didn't want to be walked over anymore. So I got new blinds. I fixed the truck, and I made a profile on a site for people who list emotional intelligence before height. First message I got said, "What brings you here?" I typed back, "An open marriage I wasn't invited to." Then I deleted it. I said, "Curiosity." That felt honest enough. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel